Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well today, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we get into tonight's second half, a couple links I'd like to share with you all. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under this video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and it definitely matters. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's second half. Shall we? Wow, guys, I literally just got done doing an amazing interview with a subscriber who had probably one of the most violent attacks that I've ever heard. And that upload will be up tomorrow. But right now, I've got tonight's second half. I've got to still work on that upload. But wow, it really shook me. And tonight's upload is going to be a combination creepy video, terrifying encounters. Let's get into them. Tonight's first encounter. At the time of these happenings, I was living near Driggs, Idaho, which is very near the border of Wyoming. A neighbor of mine had a couple of golden labs that he kept chained in the yard to two separate dog houses when the weather was nice. And other than that, they were in his house, including every night. I don't want you to get the impression that they were left outside 24/7. Both of the dogs were extremely friendly, and they even had a cat which stayed with them in the yard most of the time. One day the phone rings, and Dee says to me, "You gotta come over here. You're not gonna believe what I just found in the yard." I happened to be off that day, which Dee knew when he called, and I was at his house in 15 minutes. As he led me into the yard, both dogs were lying together, with Chauncey, who was the male, being furthest away from the house, as his chain would allow him to be. Usually they'd be jumping all over me, barking, but this day their behavior was quite abnormal. We pet them and they stayed put. As Dee brought me over to the house, he pointed to the ground. Lying before us in the dirt was a severed human hand. This hand was not neatly cut. It appeared somewhat shredded, as though it had been forcibly pulled from its former owner's arm. It was a left hand of what seemed to be a man with a Naval Academy ring on one finger. We were baffled by the find, and the dogs wouldn't go anywhere near it. The skin was intact as far as the fingers and the back of palm were concerned, but at the wrist it was mangled with tendons and flesh hanging out of what was now the open end. From the appearance of this hand, our own guess was that it hadn't been part of its former body for a long time, being well withered and decayed from our uneducated standpoint. Dee made the call as any man would, and we thought that was the end of it. Of course, how it had found its way into his yard by the dogs was completely unknown. As the next couple of weeks passed, apparently two hunters accompanied by a guide service working in the Tetons in Wyoming for Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep had come across a similar gruesome find, that being a man's body shoved headfirst into a crevice between two large boulders. Now some would say that the unfortunate hiker or hunter had fallen from above and wound up where he had been found, as dead could be. However, where his body was lodged had nothing overhead from which to fall, and so wedged was the body between the boulders that even when dead it took several men to pull it out. When the report had come in about the man who was found, as it turns out, he was missing his left hand, and a wallet was in his pocket, which contained a New York State driver's license. This was a long time ago, well before DNA testing was available, but it was later determined that the missing hand did in fact belong to this man. How exactly his hand found its way to Dee's yard is an enigma in and of itself, along with the fact that it was untouched. But who or what was capable of jamming a human being down between two boulders so hard that it was difficult to get the body back out is another kettle of fish entirely. Anyway, we don't know if it was a Dogman, Bigfoot, or some other kind of thing, but my guess is as good as yours. Alright guys, today's first video is a car driving down the road and something is bounding through the deep snow. Just something offsetting about this because, you know, everyone who has been in the snow has run in snow, and you know how hard it is to run in snow, especially deep snow, and to bound like whatever this thing is doing is very, very strong and has very long legs. Well, check it out. You guys decide. Definitely a chilling video. Like I said, if you've ever bound through snow like that, you know for a fact that you definitely have to have some strength to just push through it. You can see the snow kind of flying off its legs. I'm not saying that it's not a human, but it definitely would have to be one strong human. And of course, I expect people to say, oh, that's just a human being. Well, you know, it could be. I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying it's up to you guys to decide. To me, it looks awful strong. So, must be a strong human, if it is. Anyway, today's second encounter. It was in the mid-October of 1986 when I had gone and visited my cousin Rick, who at the time was living outside of Elkhorn, Wisconsin, the city being named supposedly by a man who had found a pair of elkhorns in a tree. At any rate, I had a little time off of work and had gone to visit him for a couple of days. I think it was on a Friday night when the two of us were indulging in a couple of brewskis that the conversation took a turn with Rick starting to talk about a so-called monster of Bray Road, if I'm correct. And it really doesn't matter as far as what happened goes. The area in which he lived and where his supposed monster dwelled was named Walworth County. He went on and on about a variety of different people who claimed to have seen basically the same thing, which was a tall wolf-like monster that walked on two legs. Some of the claims were that of seeing it in the cornfields, and others having seen it near farms or crossing roads in the area over a number of years. It was then that I had breached the subject of Bigfoot, saying that maybe what these people were seeing in fact was a Bigfoot. But Rick was empathetic in that he stood his ground, stating that this was most certainly not a Bigfoot, but rather a tall, lanky, wolf-like creature, with a long canine snout, pointed upright ears. Well, the night ended, and 2 days later, the visit had ended as well, and I was back home in Illinois. It was 2 years later, in the fall of 1988, when I once again had gone back to Wisconsin for a visit on my fall vacay. Rick had arranged for us to do a little bird shooting in a cornfield that was owned by an acquaintance of his in the area. I should mention to you that an enormous portion of this area of the state is predominantly used for dairy farming and corn production. There are fields and farmhouses, which are bordered by strips of trees like fence lines everywhere you look. We had made our way over to this farm at around 1 p.m, and were working our way through yet another field of standing corn stalks, if that's the proper terminology, when Rick said, "Did you see that?" Now we are walking side by side through this standing corn. That was quite a bit higher than our heads, with one row between us, separating the two of us as we walked. I said to Rick, "Did I see what?" He said that something that just ran by his left-hand side through the corn that looked like a large dog. At this point, we're in the middle of this large field of standing corn, far from either side of the field, and Rick was saying that there was a large dog running around in here that we couldn't see. My immediate thought was that I hoped it wasn't vicious, because it could easily have come after us from almost any angle to bite us, and there would be little, if anything, we could do about it. We certainly wouldn't start firing shots off blindly, especially with the two of us paralleling each other through the field. We stood and listened, as both of us had heard some rustling of the corn coming from different directions, but nothing else was visible. I have to say that at the time it did seem like something was circling us, moving at a very rapid pace. Either that, or there were a couple of more critters making all of the noise which we were hearing. We decided to make our way out of the field, and as we did so, Rick was going to keep his eyes looking forward and to the left, while I was going to keep one eye behind us while looking off to the right, just in case there was a pack of dogs circling us, or even a coyote, against which we could hopefully defend ourselves if need be. It was only a few moments into this moving out of the corn, as the two of us were moving side by side, that Rick said, "Son of a... what was that?" As I turned quickly to look, my view of the direction in which he was looking was broken up by standing corn between us, while he was looking straight down a row between the stalks. He shouted, "Did you see the mother jumper?" He pulled the trigger, after which I heard a loud but kind of deep yelp, which was followed by something running through the corn away from us. He then said, "Start running and don't stop," as we were both now tearing it up through the corn, heading back in the direction that we had come from. When we broke clear of the field, we stopped to catch our breath. I asked Rick what he fired at, having seen nothing myself. He told me that when this thing had first stepped into the corn row in front of him, it was on all fours and appeared to be some type of large canine, like a timber wolf. He said as his mind was trying to process it, it didn't make any sense, with nothing of that sort being known in the area. It was then that his mind shifted gears to thinking the monster of Bray Road, or whatever you call it, and before he could really make sense of it all, this creature stood on its hind legs and took some steps towards him. That's when he pulled the trigger. He described it as being some 7 feet tall, with long, thin, muscular legs and arms. When it was on all fours, its rump stood much higher than its forebody, looking like it was more of a crouched position, as if it was ready to launch itself forward. As it then stood erect, its legs had somewhat unfolded, revealing how tall it actually was. He said its face reminded him just like a timber wolf, having a long snout with visible teeth, both top and bottom, and its claws appeared to be more like a line of a hawk's talons than one you would see on a paw of a wolf or a large dog. Rick was now fully convinced that he had become the latest to sight the infamous monster, and who am I to argue with him? I only wish I had seen it with him. Alright guys, tonight's second video clip is a couple kids. They spot some rather large tracks in the snow, and they follow them. And they see something in the distance that is kind of crouched down and looking at them, and then just decides it wants to take off instead of being looked at, or maybe making a confrontation with the kids. And thank God it didn't, because even if it was not a Dogman or a Bigfoot, it could have been a bad human being. Who knows, whatever it was, but it's definitely creepy. Check it out. All right, I don't know what that is. And like I say all the time, it's your decision, your opinion. To me, it's freaky. I don't like it one way or another. But I guess because they're kids and I'm a dad, just freaks me out even more. Now, tonight's final experience. This all transpired on an Adirondack trail. I thought I'd preface this by saying you can have all the education in the world at your disposal, and a sudden lapse in common sense can cost you your life. Paige and I had set off for a day hike following a section of the Adirondack Trail in upstate New York. We were both wearing light jackets for the day, knowing that the temperatures were to be in the 50s, and it would be walking very briskly. That was lapse number one. Secondly, neither of us were carrying a compass, with both of us assuming that the trail we took in would be easy enough to follow back out, which, as it turns out, would be lapse number two. Thirdly, we had brought a reasonable amount of water for the day, as well as a limited amount of food, and the two of us planning to have a hearty meal together come dinner time. That was lapse number three. Between the two of us, we had combined 9 years of education. Despite our education, on this hike, we were incapable of making, between us, one solid decision in regards to safety and our own well-being. As a warning to all of those out there who care to heed a warning, even though we began our day by following the purported to be a major hiking trail in the region, only hours into that day's hike, we had already made several bad decisions as to which trail was the real trail while we were hiking. At around 1 in the morning, a strong wind had kicked up, and within about 40 minutes' time, what was a sunny sky started with a puffy white cloud had turned dense and gray, completely obscuring the sun. Soon after, we had lost our bearings entirely. We were lost. For the next 7 hours, for all I know, we were hiking in circles. The realization came upon us that the temperature had dropped about 10 degrees, and with the wind now howling, we were going to have to spend the night alone in the forest, or so we thought. With no flashlight in our possession, we did our best to rip down some pine trees or branches and create a windbreak to hide behind for the night. At 9 p.m., it was jet black in the trees, and I was never so afraid in my life. With the night's activities just about to begin, we had about a half a gallon of water left between us, a small package of cheese and crackers, and a health bar of some sort. At around 11 p.m., a scream rang out in the woods, which sounded like a cross between a witch and a woman being murdered. It was the most bone-chilling, blood-curdling thing either of us had ever heard in our lives, and it sounded relatively close. As our eyes adjusted to the thick darkness which surrounded us, it felt as though the wind over our heads were gusting to some 50 miles an hour at times, causing the trees both overhead as well as the ones around us to rock and sway, which created a barrage of sounds in the woods. There were creaks, cracks occurring everywhere and anywhere, as the two of us were hunkered against a tree trying to stay warm. It was around 11:45 when I heard a very loud roar. It sounded like it was close to us. Paige screamed in fear as we both tried to focus our eyes in the direction of the noise, which was by no means a tree noise. Rather, it was a deep, guttural sounding, like that of a caveman. Paige said to me, "Oh my God, there's something moving in the woods over there," and I immediately saw what she had. There was a massive silhouette of a figure, darker than that of the woods it was standing in. It was only perhaps 50 feet or less from where we were sitting. Paige and I looked at each other in the eyes in the dark, and when we looked back, whatever it was gone. A short while later, we began to hear what sounded like gibberish coming out of the woods. It started very quietly, sounding like two unintelligible people having a conversation, and then it escalated. There were two or more voices. One seemed to be shouting as the other or others were replying back in quieter, soothing tones. Whatever was being communicated was not English, albeit did sound like a language, not animal speak. It's about 12:30 and some stars are visible in the sky as the dense cloud cover seemed to break up. A short while later, the glow of a moon became visible in what we knew was the east. We waited for almost an hour until we were sure of east to west and decided to start moving toward the southwest, which was how we had began our day. I know there were many of who are already saying, "What a stupid thing to do," but we were cold and frightened, and we could actually see a little enough so that we wouldn't run into a tree or walk off a cliff. So we began to move arm in arm. The two of us hiked for hours with our hands outstretched to block any unseen branches from our faces. For the first 2 hours of our hike, the gibberish persisted to our right-hand side, but never got any closer. As far as our hearing is concerned, whatever these things were, they were flanking us as we walked in the darkness. At about 4:45 a.m., the sky began to glow behind us, and the slice of moon was overhead. A sense of calm and actual joy came over us, followed by the realization that the sounds had stopped as well. We continued to walk until 7 in the morning, having consumed half of our remaining water, when we spied out a highway below our position and made our way towards it. It took us 45 minutes until we were standing on that road, not knowing what road it was or where we were, but we weren't in those woods anymore, and that's all that counted. We sat on the side of the highway until a man came by and we waved him down. He was on his way to work, and when we told him about our ordeal, he told us to get in and actually drove us to where our car was parked, and it was all over. We know we saw and heard a Bigfoot that night. The dimensions of the figure we saw standing in the trees was unbelievable. It looked like a sheet of plywood standing on two legs, being both tall and wide. Had there not been so much noise from the trees and wind, I am confident that we would have heard them moving, but it was impossible under the conditions we found ourselves in. It seemed they were following us or escorting us out of the woods, a fact which we will never know. But had they wanted to attack us, they could have, but they didn't. All right, my friends, that is tonight's second half. I hope you guys enjoyed the terrifying encounters and compelling video clips. Definitely cool ones. Like I said, a unbelievable upload is going to be tomorrow. One of the most vicious attack, unrelenting attack I have ever heard. I truly felt sorry for this person, both because of his attack and because he reached out to people to help him, people in this community to help him, and they still denied his help and then said he was making it up. That's why I never judge, because I wasn't there. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. May the Great Spirit watch over us all. May He guide us down that path that we call life.